Welcome to Talking Back to Suicide. I am Dr. Diane Kaufman. I like to be called Diana for my creative self. I am the founder director of the Hold On campaign for suicide prevention that uses the power of art to connect, express, and heal. And this is the Talking Back to Suicide podcast where we get a chance to really explore mental health, right? And when a person is in a suicidal state of mind, we're not talking back to suicide. We're sort of absorbed into it, right? So there's my co-host Kino joining us from South Africa, and we are
Hey,
yeah, we are both honored and pleased to welcome Linda Williams. So, stories and the words we think and share are powerful. And not many people know and appreciate that the meaning of the magical phrase abracadabra is I create as I speak. So, I'm going to repeat that. I create as I speak. Talking Back to Suicide is so pleased to have Linda Williams, a storyteller and story maker from Calgary, Canada, with us today. She writes with heart, grit, and a powerful honesty, and her stories often center on women, real, raw, and unapologetic, navigating life, fighting silent battles, and finding strength in a world that doesn't always make it easy. She writes about things that matter: class, mental health, and what it really means to be a woman today. She once joked that her style is like if Raymond Carver wrote feisty women, and that tells you everything. Her characters stay with you. Linda has published in Grain Magazine, Room, and the Humber Literary Review. She's garnered awards and recently received one of the highest honors possible, and congratulations, the Lieutenant Governor of Alberta Emerging Artist Award. Most importantly, Linda's creative works help us know we are not alone. Welcome, Linda, to Talking Back to Suicide. And I know that Kino had previously met you and interviewed you on his podcast. So I'm going to turn it over to Kino about why you wanted Linda to join us.
hey, Linda.
Hey, it's lovely to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. Correct me
Likewise.
if I'm wrong, but you had a collection that was released this month. What's about to be released in September.
Yes, September 1st. The collection is called The Beauty and the Hell of It was released.
Yeah. I remember that. And you said it was going to be released in September. If anybody wants to find out more about that, please head over to the Kino Isaac podcast, search for Linda Williams, and you can hear about that story. So, Linda, welcome to Talking Back to Suicide. A few months ago, when you came on to my podcast, we touched on mental illness. You know, it's one of the topics that you focus on, and you focus on it with your artistic work as well. You brought up in that conversation, which you were so brave to do, and you're so brave coming onto this show today. So big ups to you on that. You spoke about having bipolar disorder, growing up with bipolar disorder. Over and above to that, also having a parent who also had bipolar disorder. So it's generational. So on this podcast, I wanted you to chat about that experience for yourself personally, with the disorder and growing up in a home where a parent had bipolar disorder. So you can start at any point where you feel comfortable. You don't need to say anything that you're not comfortable with saying. Floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you, Kino. So my journey with mental health started quite young. While my mother had bipolar disorder for my entire childhood, she wasn't actually diagnosed with it until I was 17. And by that time, I was already having some serious mental health problems of my own. Um, when I was 14, I became very depressed and I was diagnosed with major depression. Unfortunately, the antidepressants that I was prescribed actually made things worse because I started cycling through hypomanic episodes and then worse and worse depression. And that's when I started to experience suicidal ideation for the first time.
You said you were 14 when were there, looking back, do you think that there were symptoms before that? I myself am a retired child psychiatrist. I also have my own mental health history. But so tell us a little bit before 14, what was going on?
I think you're right. There were symptoms before I was 14 because I actually had a hypomanic episode when I was 13. However, because hypomania can be so, I guess, so lovely in terms of how you feel, you don't think, oh, I need to ask for help. I need to consult a doctor about this. I'm walking an inch above the sidewalk. I feel great. And also I was, a very young adolescent then. I didn't realize that it didn't happen to everyone. I thought, people just felt this way. This is how normal life was. I was going through puberty. There were lots of ups and downs. So that didn't register until later that, oh, this is significant. And then go ahead.
Could you say a little bit more about the hypomanic symptoms that you were having? It sounds like one was an elevated positive mood.
Absolutely. And then the more concerning ones were my lack of need for sleep, which normally I was a teenager, I was growing, I slept hard for 8 hours, and then suddenly I couldn't sleep anymore. And then I also lost my appetite. I found it very hard to sit still just long enough to, eat a proper meal. My lunch would go in the garbage at school, and that was also, again, unlike me. It was.
And any impulsive behaviors?
At that time, no. When I got older and I started dealing with hypomanic episodes, I did deal with like hypersexuality and that sort of thing. That wasn't something that started right away, though.
Other possible symptoms can be a little bit of maybe not rapid speech, but talking a little more quickly or having more creative ideas.
Yeah, I think my friends really noticed that one, that there was this witty charm that I would exude during certain periods. And they said, it's like you have split personalities, Linda, because normally I was fairly quiet, fairly reserved, and then I would just sort of burst open.
This experience, did it last consistently for several days, or did it come and go? What was it like that way?
It was consistent, and it lasted for a couple weeks. Yeah.
Did your family in any way notice anything was a little different?
If they did, they didn't say. When I became depressed afterwards, they did realize that, something seems off, but at the same time, they'd already raised two teenagers. They thought, okay, the teenage angst is strong with her, and they didn't know exactly what to do.
And so did the mental health journey sort of begin with the hypomanic experience, or was there depressive symptoms before that?
Before that, no, it really did begin with that. I knew that my mother had had a postpartum breakdown when she was 27. And I didn't understand that at all. Like, I didn't understand how she could lose her will to live. And
Wow.
it seemed so foreign to me before my depressive episode. And then I found out very quickly that, oh, this is how it happens. This is what it feels like.
And when she had a postpartum depression, was that related to your birth or a sibling's birth?
It was actually after a miscarriage, but it was before I was born. Yeah.
And how did you learn of that?
My parents were open about that. That was something that was really good because ultimately, when I became severely depressed, I went to my mother and I asked her, what do you do when you don't know how to live
Oh
anymore?
my goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And how old were you when you asked your mom that question?
I was just shy of 15.
What did your mom say? And what was her reaction to having her daughter say this?
I think it must have been extremely hard, but she said, I think we should see a doctor. And she made the appointment. She came to me with it. And unfortunately, it was a general practitioner. So I came away with a prescription for Paxil.
Mm.
And at the time, I don't know if it was fairly new or if she just didn't realize that often in adolescence, it can lead to an increase in suicidal thoughts, which is exactly what I experienced. So after a couple weeks on it, I ended up being hospitalized for several weeks.
And was this depression the aftermath of the hypomanic episodes? I think you were saying that at 14 you started to experience changes which were in retrospect sort of related to hypomania. But was what you just described in terms of depression and developing suicidal thinking, was that followed that hypomanic, that first hypomanic episode?
It did. And it was very much fueled by my desire to get back to a place of feeling like that. I thought, there's something wrong with me that I don't feel this way anymore. There's something I
Meaning you
need to
don't feel
do.
that, you don't feel the hypomania anymore?
Yeah, that sense of elation, right?
So I'm getting just a little confused. When you said getting back to that feeling, where do you mean you became aware that something was not right because you were no longer feeling the hypomania, or do you mean something else?
I mean, I thought what I felt with the hypomania was actually what my baseline should be. So
Yeah, you
I
thought
thought,
that was quote normal. Yeah.
yes, exactly.
Mhm. Were there any, and of course in life there's always stressors, but were there any stressors going on in your life at that time?
Um,
Home, school, socially, otherwise?
Honestly, everything was pretty much the same. I mean, it was a hard time. My cousin had an accident, a severe car accident, and we didn't know if he was going to make it or not. So I remember my father being really stressed about that, just because he was closest with this particular nephew, and that sort of reverberated into our family. But beyond that, it was a pretty normal time.
Yeah. And what were some of the early symptoms that your mood was off? And of course, in terms of depression, it's not only the mood, it's your sleeping, your appetite, your thinking, and so many things. But was it a gradual decline or was there a sudden change? Describe that.
It was definitely a gradual decline. And one of the things I noticed is I started to lose interest in things that had previously interested me. When I spent time with my friends, I found it increasingly taxing because I sort of lost my sense of humor. Like they would be joking and laughing, and I would be watching their faces to see when I was supposed to paste my smile on because I didn't find the punchline funny anymore. Nothing seemed funny to me. Um, Eventually, what happened, because I did write a lot even then, I got to a point where I struggled to concentrate enough to write. And that was one of the things that really pushed me to seek help from my mother because it was completely foreign to me not to be able to sit down for hours at a time and just write stuff.
Mhm. And was there a change in your sleep or appetite that accompanied the change in your mood?
Well, I developed an eating disorder through this. And so there was definitely, that was one of the things my parents noticed. She's not eating, she's restricting her intake. And I would be feeding the dog under the table. And so I lost maybe 15 pounds. In terms of sleeping, I didn't, that was something the first time around, I didn't notice a big difference. Eventually, it became so that when I was depressed, I would want to sleep much more.
Yeah, then that can happen. Yes.
Yeah.
And how did the suicidal thinking evolve?
So, over the period of ninth grade, when I was 14, I prayed every day that a Mack truck would hit me and just end it. It was definitely passive suicidal ideation. I didn't engage in self-harm. I would almost say I didn't have the courage to do that. But at the same time, I felt very drawn towards death. I wasn't interested in life anymore.
Did it ever reach the point that it became more active or planning to hurt yourself, giving things away, writing involving themes of people killing themselves?
I didn't get to the point where I was giving things away or making plans, but it became more persistent that this went from something that was niggling at the back of my mind to, okay, this has moved front and center. This is all I want. Yeah, I was really fortunate that I got help when I did. Yeah.
And why do you say that?
Because I think I would have crossed the line between passive and active. Like I remember the first time I was admitted to the hospital, they started asking questions about, well, have you made any plans and that sort of thing. And I said no. And I think if it had been a week or two later, that very well could have been a yes answer.
How well were you able to function as a student when all this was going on?
So until the end of the year, I managed to keep it together. I didn't write final exams that year, but because I had been an A student, they actually just bumped me up to the next grade, which I was fortunate and grateful for. I think I remember one time we were playing, yeah, it was softball in gym, and I just struck out one after the other again and again. And I remember afterwards being in one of the bathroom stalls just crying, and one of my friends knocking on the door and asking, hey, are you okay? And of course I said, I'm fine. I'm fine. I wanted her to think it was about softball, right? But yeah, that was when I got to the edge of being able to hide what was going on from my friends.
And in the passive suicidal thoughts, were you having, and one doesn't necessarily have to have this, but were you having negative thoughts about yourself? I don't know, I'm a loser, or people hate me, or I'll never succeed, a variety, of negative thinking.
Absolutely. And at that point, my eating disorder was so bad that I think I thought it would be better to be dead than fat, which is a horrible thing. But that's how distorted my thinking about myself was. So of course, I felt compelled to be perfect in every way. I needed the perfect grades. I needed the perfect life. I needed the perfect body. And I was failing on all accounts in my own estimation.
Prior to this depression and prior to that, the hypomania, were there elements of perfectionism in your personality?
I had high standards for myself, but I didn't agonize about things. It was different, like I wanted good grades, but if I got 80s, I thought that was great, right? Like who needs the 90? Who needs to be the top of the class or the honors roll?
So this was definitely different or an exaggeration. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
It's becoming pathological for your well-being.
Yeah.
I want to say that you are so articulate in describing this, and I want to thank you for that. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, I guess I'm grateful I've had opportunities to talk about this over the years.
So, following what you've shared, there you are experiencing a major depression, or at that time it was felt to be major depression, and told your mom, what do you say the words again that you said to your mom? What do you do
when you don't know how to live anymore?
And she said, I think we need to go to the doctor, right?
Yeah.
You went to your primary care doctor, right? And that doctor prescribed to you Paxil, which is a SSRI medication, right? And there is a black box warning now on antidepressant medication because it can, for some individuals, young and older, exacerbate symptoms of depression. So that and lead to an intensity of suicidal thinking that potentially could lead to a suicidal behavior. So how quickly, if you recall, after the Paxil, were things getting worse for you?
I think it was within days. Yeah, because I remember that before I was admitted to the hospital, my parents brought me to the ER, and I was seen as an outpatient. And ultimately, they did send me home again, and they didn't change the prescription. But it continued to get worse, and my parents brought me back to the ER, and they said,
Could
look.
say a few things about it's getting worse. What became worse? The symptoms you were having.
So what I remember is that I started sobbing uncontrollably, hiding under furniture. I went from being bad but functional in a much more, I was deceiving people with my level of how I was functioning, but I went to not functioning.
Yeah. So thank God got to the emergency room and they admitted you. Right.
Yes.
And what can happen? Again, I mentioned the black box warning. So that I remember when I would prescribe antidepressant medication or any psychiatric medication, I would tell my patients and their parents, because I was a child psychiatrist, that please be aware, right? If things are getting better, let me know how things are changing. If things are getting worse in any way, don't assume, well, that's just me, and the illness, because now you're on medication and these medications can have side effects, right? So that's very important. And also I want to mention that bipolar disorder sometimes can be difficult to diagnose because, as you also mentioned, when there's hypomania, and we'll get into the mania part later, but when there's hypomania, it's an upswing and it's not dysfunctional and it can be positive. You have more energy, you're more social, you're more creative, and you're on a bit of a high. You're a little elevated from the floor. Right? And a person in a hypomanic state is not seeking mental health treatment, and the people around them may not recognize there's something different. So it's the depression that brings someone into treatment, right? Hopefully, if they realize they need help and they're not ashamed to get help. And a person may not, in an interview, unless I think the interviewer specifically asks questions, a person may not specifically bring up, hey, I've experienced these other kind of symptoms, right, of elevated mood. So they're focused, of course, on talking about the depression. Now, when a SSRI medication is prescribed, there is a potential risk factor of it flipping the person who has the bipolar disorder that has not yet been manifested or at least diagnosed into a hypomanic or manic state. So on the one hand, that's a negative, right? Especially if one goes into mania or psychosis, which could be associated with a bipolar disorder. So of course, that's a negative. On the other hand, it can also be a little bit of a positive because now we know that we're not dealing with unipolar disorder, but there's a bipolar disorder and the medication is different, right? Or could be a combination of a mood stabilizer and perhaps a little bit of an antidepressant medication if that's indicated. So circling back to you, what was your inpatient hospitalization like for you? And I ask because many people can be afraid of being admitted to a psychiatric hospital, more afraid than being admitted to a medical unit. So what was your experience like?
It was very gentle because I was submitted or admitted to the pediatric ward rather than the psychiatric ward just because of my age. So that was probably actually very good for my mental health to actually see these sick children who were still, fighting. And I remember I shared my room with one little girl who had cystic fibrosis, right? So she was about 8 years old. And, she had some major challenges ahead of her. And she just took it all on the chin, So it gave me hope, really. And that's not necessarily what you would experience on a psychiatric ward. When I was 19, I was admitted to a psychiatric ward. And that experience was different, definitely. Yeah.
So how many days were you on the pediatric floor? And I assume did you have consultation besides your pediatric attending? Did you have consultation with a child psychiatrist or some type of mental health provider while you were on the medical floor?
Yes. So it was 16 days, and I was very lucky because it was a university hospital. So I saw a child psychiatrist, and then he had the resident and an intern who also followed me.
So it's a teaching hospital, which can provide perhaps a better quality of care.
Yeah, I think at the time I was a bit of a snarky teenager and I thought, well, why do I have to say everything 3 times? But when I look back, I appreciate it.
And when you were now in the hospital, what was the diagnosis then provided?
They still went with major depression, and they changed the antidepressant, I think, to Effexor.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And then what happened is a pattern started to emerge. As I was an outpatient, they continued to follow me. I would be fine. And then I would reach a plateau where I would start to become depressed again, and they would increase my dose a little. And then I ended up being on the maximum dose I could be on for my size. And then they moved on to a different medication. And my father started to notice that, when they change things, you get better, but you get too good, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I hadn't clued into that yet. I was like, I feel so much better again. This is it. I've finally come through it. And it wasn't until my mother received her diagnosis that they started to look at this. Oh, this is a real possibility for you.
So maybe for the moment, let's put a pause to your story and talk about your mother's story.
Yeah. So, if we go to the same time frame, what was happening for her is her mental health was deteriorating as I struggled because it was becoming very taxing for her. And she had received support for her postpartum depression, but she hadn't had any follow-up since. In her mind, she had recovered. She didn't have a diagnosis. And it started to wear on her, and she became very depressed. And then she saw a wonderful psychiatrist who diagnosed her with bipolar disorder based on her history.
To your knowledge, what type of symptoms of hypomania or mania did she have?
I think hers was more irritable than mine, and it might have been a question of age because she was in her 40s by then, and you're going through perimenopause. So I really noticed that mostly my mother has a very sweet disposition, but there are times where her fuse would just be like very short. I noticed sometimes differences in her driving. Normally, again, very calm, patient driver. And then other times, if somebody cut her off or something, it was like something just snapped. And we were driving very fast on the way home type thing. So some risk-taking behaviors in there. I noticed when she was depressed, her appetite would change. She was someone who always had a very good appetite. And I remember telling her once, it's like you're pushing sawdust around in your mouth when you're chewing and you're depressed. It's just like you have no taste for food anymore. I could see it on her that way.
I'd like you to say a little bit more about her postpartum depression.
Okay.
What was that like, and the symptoms? How long did it last?
So she had a miscarriage, and then there was a period after that where she asked my father if he would take her to the doctor because she was feeling out of sorts, right? She knew something was off. And then he basically dismissed her that time. And, he said, this is normal, right? You're going through something hormonal and it's a big change. And she
So
ended up,
that this was immediately after the miscarriage. So it's hormone changes. You may also be grieving, right?
yeah.
Let's give it time to see, what happens. What is that? What you're saying in terms of, quote, dismissed it?
Yes, exactly. And then she did enter psychosis.
Oh, yes, yeah. Mhm.
And then he
What
took
were
her.
what were those symptoms like, according to what she told you, or your dad told you?
That's the part they don't talk about a lot. I know that's what made him take her to the hospital. And the first hospital they went to, things didn't go well there. They put her on medication and she responded poorly. And my father was butting heads with the psychiatrist about this. He wanted her off the medication and to try something else because he could see this was making things worse. It was aggravating the situation and it was already bad. He ended up taking her out of that hospital, taking her to another
Was she
hospital.
admitted? She was psychotic? She was admitted to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. And then he dealt with a lovely psychiatrist who found something for her. And it was 40 days in the hospital. This was like 1979. They did things differently. The medication she was on was very strong. It wasn't like now I find with psychiatric medications, the idea is that you will function on them. This was more like, okay, we're going to drug you to sleep, like horse tranquilizers was the impression I got. That for a long time, what she basically just slept. And it was really, I think she said about 9 months before she went back to her routine. They have a dairy farm, so that she was choring every day with my father and doing all of the things again. And that was really hard because my brother was only 4 at the time. So she lost almost a year of his
Yeah,
childhood.
I was going to ask you if she was a mom at that point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm so sorry to hear your mom went through that, and glad that she recovered. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And following that recovery, when she recovered, did she go back to normal?
Absolutely. Like my father describes those as very steady years for her. She had another miscarriage after that, and she took that in stride. And then my sister was born, and I was born 18 months later. And we were all pretty happy for a while. Yeah.
And that things were okay for her until you were having your mental health difficulties.
Yeah, I think that's when things started to come undone.
And it's interesting that you mentioned her mood becoming irritable, because if that's out of character for a person in terms of becoming irritable. Irritability can be a symptom of a mood disorder. It could be irritability related to depression, but it can also be irritability related to hypomania or mania. So that's really important for people to realize that it's not just that elevated mood. A person can become irritable, angry, rageful in an altered state related to a mood disorder. And sometimes there can be a mixed state where the person is going back and forth in terms of their emotions, laughing, exuberant, angry, irritable, cursing, happy, like jello, their mood. And there can also be rapid cycling, right? They're in one state and then they're rapidly fully going into another state. So let's go back to you. So you were discharged from the hospital, right? And then received, was it outpatient treatment or was it there another hospitalization?
I received outpatient treatment until I was 18, and then I was moved into the adult care system.
Yes.
So I had a new psychiatrist, and she did diagnose me with bipolar disorder at the age of 18 and put me on lithium. Unfortunately, I did not respond well to lithium either, and that's what I ended up getting hospitalized again.
What happened in terms of side effects to the lithium?
The lithium was interesting in terms of it didn't seem to help, but it also, I don't know if it was affecting my blood pressure. Like I was faint and dizzy a lot of the time. And maybe I wasn't drinking enough. This is something I appreciate now, that you need to drink a lot of water
Yes,
if you're on
you do.
lithium.
Mhm.
So it could have been something as simple as that. But I think having gone through what I did the first time around with medication, I was very leery or suspicious of what could happen.
Mhm.
So I think I was hospitalized much more quickly this time. But the interesting thing that happened then, the doctor who saw me in the hospital was not in agreement about the bipolar diagnosis. He thought it was borderline personality
Oh
disorder.
my.
And at that point, I was like, okay, I'm on my third diagnosis. I'm not even 20. Like, who do I believe? And I made the bold decision to move to Calgary. I had my antidepressant that was still being prescribed to me as someone with borderline personality disorder. So he still wanted me on that. So I had 6 months worth of that. And I moved here. I tried to find a psychiatrist, and it didn't go that well because it was 2002. I was without a landline even, or a cell phone. So I was using my boyfriend's cell phone as a contact number, not getting very important messages that I should have been getting. And I gave up on it. I decided, you know what? Maybe it's not me. Maybe it's you, as we sometimes do when we're not very mature and we're a little confused by everything that's happening. And by the time I was 21, the established pattern of mood elevation and depression became so consistent. I knew for myself, even without seeing a professional, that this was bipolar disorder. So I saw a family doctor who got me in touch with a psychiatrist who actually prescribed the mood stabilizer I'm still on today.
Which medication is that?
That is Divalproex.
Yeah. So what? I think is that Depakote? I think it might
Yes.
be. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's been helping you.
Yes, that is amazing. I do still take an antidepressant with that and an antipsychotic.
Did you also experience psychotic symptoms during the mood changes?
No, the antipsychotic came into my life in my 30s, and that I take mostly to help with like paranoid thoughts.
Mm.
That is something I didn't deal with when I was younger, and then I became more self-referencing, and those sort of things started to affect me in my 30s. And I talked to my psychiatrist about it, and we decided on Abilify.
Okay. Yes, and Abilify itself can have mood stabilizing properties as
Right.
well. Yeah.
Yeah.
During the course of that mental health journey, did you continue at times to have suicidal thinking?
Yes. That thing where you're walking over a bridge and you look down and you think, I could take care of this now, right? I still experience that. And when I was in my mid-20s, I lost a good friend to suicide. And at the time, I didn't realize that those things could happen in clusters, but that I was in shock for a long time, and I didn't know how to deal with it because I was open about my diagnosis with bipolar disorder, but I don't know that I was necessarily a safe person to talk to about suicide because I hadn't really spoken about suicidal ideation. I tended to make very light of my diagnosis. You know, if someone had joked that, oh, Linda, did you take your pills today? Because they noticed I was a little irritable or whatever, I would just laugh with them, which it's not really a funny joke. But I regret not being more open about the suicidal ideation and those things earlier.
Could you say more about that? Why do you have regret?
Because I think being a safe person to talk about those things is more than saying, oh, I have a diagnosis. There is an aspect of vulnerability in it. And while I was free with the information that I have this diagnosis, I wasn't free with my vulnerability. And that's the part that I regret, that I wish that this person might have felt safe to turn to me and let me hold space for those feelings.
You're talking about your friend who ultimately took their life.
Yes, yeah.
And I'm so sorry that your friend took that step, and also that her loved ones experienced such a loss. You know, there's no coming back from suicide, you know, this side on earth. Yeah.
No.
What happened with your eating disorder during, you know, the course of your growing up?
Interesting. So when I was in the hospital the first time, they did evaluations to sort of, I guess, find out, you know, where is this coming from? Are we dealing with anorexia? Are we dealing with bulimia? And the results came out as eating disorder, otherwise unspecified, because I didn't purge. It was mostly restrictive behavior.
Something now, I think, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, ARFID. I think
Yes.
that's like a more recent diagnosis.
Yeah, like this was 97, so I'm not sure if that was out yet, but that's very much accurate. And so as I spoke to a psychologist in tandem with seeing a child psychiatrist, we talked about that. And the one thing they did that I disagree with now, they weighed me every week, which I didn't need to be paying attention to that because your weight isn't a marker of recovery, or it doesn't have to be, right? So I actually held on to a lot of those restrictive behaviors through my 20s. I think it wasn't really until my 30s where I got to a point where I was like, I don't care how other people perceive my body. I want to be comfortable in it. I want to enjoy food. It's part of how you say yes to life. And it was freeing. Like, I feel differently now than I do. Like in my 20s, you know, you would have a nice dessert and you would think, oh, I have to burn these calories off. No, you don't.
Mm-hmm. So how are you doing now? And also, how, if you don't mind saying, how old are you now?
I'm 42, and I've definitely noticed changes over the years in terms of how I experience bipolar. So when I was younger, and if I was experiencing a hypomanic episode, it was euphoric. It was enjoyable, and that would make me reluctant to share with my healthcare providers. As I grow older, I see more irritability coming into it. I can see more of the the mixed states where I go from feeling a little bit elevated to, okay, now I'm feeling rageful. But I've had the same psychiatrist for 10 years now. So I have a good solid relationship and consistency there.
Mhm.
So that's been very positive. Well, I do see that I deal more with depression as I age. I would say that, and this isn't necessarily a good thing, I'm less afraid of depression than I am of hypomanic episodes, because depression feels almost safe to me in the sense that I know I have always come out the other side of it. I have a good support network, and I don't engage in dangerous behaviors, right? The risk taking that I do if I'm hypomanic. So I feel like the damage bill that you get sometimes at the end of a hypomanic episode is not as severe with depression, although I might be hard on myself, sell myself short. I don't put other people at risk.
Was there any of the episodes where it was felt that you were manic and not hypomanic?
No, I haven't had that experience. Like, I haven't experienced psychosis. I haven't had that experience of, oh, like there's voices compelling me to do something, or the illusions of grandeur. Mostly what I noticed was an increase in creativity, that I would have many projects on the go, and then all of a sudden I would hit a wall with that, and I would have started so many things
Yeah.
and nothing would be finished.
You mentioned risk-taking behavior, and in hypomania and in mania, and mania is the more extreme form of all these symptoms in terms of the mood, the impulsivity. A person could bankrupt themselves. Like I knew a woman, a very moral, upstanding person who in her manic state had bankrupted herself on credit cards. I've met people who had multiple sexual partners, sexual indiscretions, whereas that is totally not their way of being. Met a woman once where there was, I think it's erotomania. She suddenly developed a fixation on someone, a love, sex intensity towards a perfect stranger. And this was related to being in a manic state. What was it like for you in terms of impulsive behaviors that were frightening? Because then the person comes back to normal and they have to pick up the pieces of their life.
Mm-hmm. And so you hit the nail on the head with those two. So spending, and I think I was always very fortunate that I worked in retail. So I had a very low threshold credit card. There was no bankrupting myself on that, but just spending money frivolously, right? That sort of thing, that you come out of it and you regret it and you realize this is money I didn't have to spend. And then also with relationships, I noticed that often I was quite content to be single and be with my own company. But then I would just become rapidly infatuated and involved in a relationship that probably wasn't very stable or healthy. And that happened several times in my 20s. And I'm married now, so that's something that's off the table. But at the same time, you could let that happen very easily too.
Yeah, especially if there's a mood disorder component.
Yes.
I mean, let's face it, there are people that don't have mood disorders, so they're engaging with extramarital relationships. But if you have a mood disorder, especially where there's mania involved, that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, Kino, I know you have been having attention, right, to a very engaging conversation. Any thoughts you want to share or questions?
There's so much to take in with this conversation. I'm overwhelmed. I'm sure listeners are going to be overwhelmed. But as we always say to listeners, if you don't understand anything that is getting spoken about on the show, reach out to the Hold On campaign, because it can become overwhelming. Like, I'm going to ask a baby question for the baby listeners who can't define what depression is, because Linda, you spoke about having severe depression. How do we differentiate a mild depression to a severe depression? How will someone know?
That's a bit of a tricky question. Some of it is how long it lasts, but also sometimes we confuse depression with sadness. And for me, my experience of depression is very much the absence of emotion. And it wasn't just the absence of joyful emotions, it was also having the ability to cry over something that you might normally find sad. There's often a feeling of numbness that accompanies depression. And that is also very difficult and almost shameful sometimes, if you're dealing with someone's death and, you're grieving and then there are no tears. It feels almost like a betrayal. So there's that aspect of it, but also the loss of interest in those activities that bring you joy. I think that's a really important marker, and that can be an early marker.
Yeah, because I'm sure there's
by definition, in terms of the DSM-5 statistical manual, which is like as it is in its title, for diagnoses for mental health professionals and also for insurance purposes, a major depression is defined as at least 2 weeks of a variety of symptoms. But you raise a really important question, Kino, because there's sadness, depression with a small d, not the big D of major depression, and there's grieving. There's reaction to disappointments in life, right? And there can be confusion, or not that there can be, there is confusion about when is there a difficulty that I need to seek help for. And it can't be just explained by, well, this happened to me in my external life, so of course I'm feeling off a bit, right? Or how can that person who's actually experiencing a bona fide mental health medical illness, because we want to get across, in talking back to suicide, that psychiatric illness is as real as a physical illness, because it is a physical illness as it affects the brain, right? And the brain is the center post of all of our functioning, right? Our emotions, our concentration, our appetite, our sleep, it's all going on in our neurotransmitters in our brain. I've met people who have said, and not in a mean-spirited way, but would say, well, I just don't understand why people don't just snap out of it, right? I've been sad, I've had problems in my life, and yes, I was down, but then I got up again. And people are exaggerating, or they don't need, they're making it up, or it's a cry for help, or it's manipulation, or they just don't have the stamina or the personality. And none of those things are true when it comes to having a psychiatric illness. It doesn't have anything to do with your personality, right? It doesn't have anything to do with your grit, right? You could be the most a person who has great perseverance, right? And great social skills, and you've overcome a lot in your life. But a mental illness can what's the word? Fell you. It can bring you to your knees, right? And so we want to educate individuals, the population, that there is such a thing as psychiatric illness. It's real. It's nothing to be ashamed about. very many people have a psychiatric illness, right? And here in the United States, suicide is it's the 11th leading cause of death. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, suicide is the 11th leading cause of death. Here in my state of Oregon, it's the 8th leading cause of death. And in my state, it's the second leading cause of death for ages 15 to 34. And across the United States, it's the second leading cause of death for 10 to 34. Let alone, it's the older population that is most at risk of suicide. So this is, and I'm not sure if you know the statistics in Canada, but it's a worldwide problem of lives lost that didn't need to be lost.
It's a pandemic.
Absolutely.
Pandemic. We all went all out with COVID pandemic, complete lockdown. But here we are with a silent pandemic, and there's little attention on it, besides the minority, just like us, that, try to do something about it. That's the sad part. Linda, you made a statement the first time we met that mental illness should not stop you from being a parent. And given what you've mentioned on the show, you had like a strong family support growing up with your disorder. So is that related to that statement? Can we educate parents or someone who wants to start a family, but they know they got this disorder, that yes, you can do it. It is possible to start a family?
Absolutely. I think there's a resilience that comes from living with mental illness that lends itself to parenting. And that as someone who lives with mental illness, although your children might have an increased chance of developing it themselves, you're also perhaps more equipped to deal with that.
Are you a parent yourself too?
I am not, no.
But say more about that resilience. How does that resilience develop?
When I think about my mother, and it's not something I appreciated necessarily when I was a kid, but I now look back at the way she would take joy from small things. And I took it for granted that this was just how she was. But what I learned is her joy was a practice. I remember the radio that sat beside the stove in our house. And the first thing she would do in the morning when she came in from the barn was turn that on. And music brought her such joy. She liked to dance to that radio in the kitchen, just randomly. And books, my love of books came from her. But all of these things were a conscious decision that I am going to reap the joy that life has to offer, because at times it is so hard. And she was a beautiful role model in that way. But also when it came time for me to lean on her with my own mental health problems, she was there to accompany me to the doctor. She knew what to do, right? She wasn't going to downplay that. She didn't make a big deal out of it where I regretted telling her. She stayed calm in that. And also my father was incredibly supportive because he had supported her. He knew what she needed in these times, and he was able to show me that support as well.
It's so liberating to hear you talk about your parents that way, in terms of not to be raised in a family where there's shame, shame that the parents can feel is being put upon themselves because of their child's difficulty or even adults' difficulty. Whereas it sounds like your parents loved you, right? And felt there's no shame, there's a difficulty, let's get help for that, right? That's so great, because I know from I want to share, I know from personal experience, and I would say my parents loved me, but there was shame associated with some mental health difficulties that I had had. I'm also diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder, like you, which is the hypomania and the depression. And when I was in medical school, had attempted suicide. Little did I know until, well, 20 something years later, or nearly 20 years later, my dad apologized to me. He said, I need to apologize to you. And I had no idea what he was going to say. And he was not a man that ever apologized. And he told me that he had told me after my suicide attempt that, Diane, the next time you want to kill yourself, tell me, and I'll tell you the right way to do it. Shocking, right? And there was so much shame and anger that my parents had about having a daughter that was having mental health difficulties. And hopefully we can be different now and love our children through the difficulties that they're having, because it's so important to be able to go to someone when you're not feeling well and not feel attacked by the people that ought to be helping you, because it can shut a person down from seeking help. And I think hopefully a first place, if possible, would be to get help within your very own family. However, if that family, for whatever reason, is not the safe place, we can't give up. We have to seek help somewhere else, right? That could be your friends, other family members, a medical doctor, faith community, calling a hotline. I think in Canada, it's also 988, just like it is in the United States. But I'm happy for you that you were able to go to your family and they stood by you.
I'm so happy about that too. And I think one of the reasons they really wanted to eradicate that shame is my mother's family wasn't supportive. They encouraged her to go off her medication, and they were very much in denial about her psychiatric illness. So it was very important to my parents not to be that way.
That's inspiring, because it's like we can break the chain, right? We can make a real difference with how we act now. We don't have to repeat things in the past if they're not appropriate or working out for us, right? We can have agency.
Yeah.
What is that? Going back to the beginning, abracadabra, I create as I speak. I can create something new.
What would be your message, Linda, to parents out there who they love their children, but they brush away the disorder because they don't know how to handle it? So it's easier for me to just brush it aside and tell you, look, fight it, get on with it. It's something that's just passing by. What would be your advice to them?
Be brave for your children and face this. Be still with their pain. Give them space to share that with you.
That's powerful.
So beautifully
Accept it.
said. And Linda, you should do a TED Talk, really, right? Sharing your story, right? Because it's profound, right? And so real. And you're an excellent, communicator.
Yeah, no, definitely. Linda, to conclude, I got one more question. You mentioned also that your artistic career saved your life.
Yes.
So can you explain more, about that? How do we push young creatives to focus more on their creative work, that actually eliminates the mental illness without them even realizing it,
For me, it was a way to process so much of the trauma and the the difficulties that I was going through. Like, especially when I lost my friend to suicide, that was something I didn't cope with well on the surface, and it came out a lot in the stories I wrote. I kept circling back to that. So it did allow for a catharsis in that sense. But also just creating something can be very redemptive, that you're taking something from nothing, whether you're sculpting or baking a pie or writing something. It's just it's a grounding thing. It's satisfying, and it gives you something to be proud of, right? Something to share.
Yeah.
Linda, on September 10th, which was and is World Suicide Prevention Day, I made an announcement of the Create Resilience Youth Art Contest for Suicide Prevention award winners. The Hold On campaign, had received funding from the Oregon Council for Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, as well as Blick Art Materials, an art store, also gave some gift certificates. And the theme was, just like you're saying, improving youth mental health, right? And to do that creatively, in terms of, it could be an essay, a story, a poem, photography, visual artwork. And we had 20 submissions across the state of Oregon. Just as you're saying, that creative expression, to get it out on paper, and the canvas is a safe place, right? And then that experience of satisfaction, right, of expressing it, right? And then the idea that possibly, if one would want to do this, you can share that with others, and that will have meaning for them as well. And I'm going to be sending you the link to the website where the artwork and the poetry and stories are shared, right? And to encourage people to be creative, that can be an avenue for healing. It's not, but I want to emphasize this, it's not a replacement. If you're having a severity of symptoms, the artwork and the creativity may not, and probably won't, if you're having severe symptoms, be enough to help you or heal you. So please also check with your medical doctor, your psychiatrist, your emergency room, because we know of many creative people who have sadly died by suicide, right? And we wish they had gotten help, because you can be creative and also have mental health stability, right? It doesn't have to be one or the other. You can have both, right?
That's huge.
But your words, that what you just said about the creative process was so well said, right? And also that idea about families supporting their loved ones. So how can we learn more about you, and especially also about your writing?
Okay, so I have a website. It's lindawilliams.ca. And then I'm on Instagram as Linda_Williams_author. And I'm also on Facebook as Linda Williams.
Wonderful. Going to put that into the description, right? Thank you so
much. I want to mention your
much.
collection that's coming out in September,
Yes. I have a copy of it here. I'll just hold it up if the light isn't. The Beauty and the Hell of It. Yes. So it's a collection of 14 short stories about women who are dealing with mental health challenges, grief, loss, trauma, all the things we've talked about today.
And where can listeners
find? I'm going to purchase your book, Linda.
Yeah. Where can listeners find your book? Is it on the website? Yeah.
It's on the website. Yes, there's a link on the website.
Wonderful.
Perfect. Perfect. Linda, thank you so much.
Linda. Really wonderful to meet you and to speak with you.
Likewise, Diana. Kino, it's lovely to be here. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.